to the House.
Meka Whaiteri, 5 minutes.
Koe, Mr Speaker, tēnā tātou katoa, ngā me mō te whare nei. Mr Speaker, it gives me a great privilege to stand in with my Labour colleagues to support the Victims' Orders Against Violent Offenders Bill. Second reading, I believe, Mr Speaker. And join with my colleagues, and it sounds like all members of this House, in supporting what I consider is one of those make sense types bill, where we're putting victim rights in the centre of legislation. And so on that basis, Mr Speaker, I do support the bill in its passage through Parliament. But in my own, and I'm not a member of the Law and Order Committee, but in my own little research of this bill, Mr Speaker, I note that its purpose is to recognise the ongoing effects of serious violent offending on victims by giving them the power to apply for a non-contact order against the offender, which prohibits the offender from having any form of contact with the victim. The orders, Mr Speaker, can be temporary or final and aim to limit the chances of a victim coming into contact with a person who offended against them. There are other types of orders currently existing to protect victims, but they have limitations. Mr Speaker, when having a look through the recommendations of the Select Committee, can I acknowledge the work that they have done in providing their comments back to the House. I understand that there are a range of measures already in place, but like the Domestic Violence Act 1995 and like the Harassment Act 1997, but on researching them, there are some time limit restrictions in terms of those particular acts. So I understand that this bill is looking at ensuring that victims' rights in terms of a non-contact with the offender is protected and upheld. But, Mr Speaker, there are two parts of the bill in my short core that I want to highlight, and that is the Clause 7, applying for an order. And my colleague Jacinda Ardern mentioned it, as I'm sure other speakers on this bill did, and that's around the tool to put a non-contact on associates. And as we all know, when offences have occurred and the offenders have been apprehended, often a lot of criminal cases, they have friends or mates or partners in crime that are not subjected to charges. And so our victims also need to know that they're protected from the associates, and the amendment suggested by Select Committee in Clause 7 is actually doing that, and I want to commend that piece of work too in terms of amendments. Mr Speaker, the other two parts of this bill that I particularly drew my attention were the two types of order, one the temporary and one the final. And again, looking at opposing a temporary order to ensure that both the victim's rights and to give the opportunity to the offender to defend those before moving into something final. In reading the recommendations, Mr Speaker, from the committee, it's really clear that the intention of this bill is to be a protective bill versus a punitive bill. And so I support, like other members on this side, and indeed the House, in acknowledging the work of the Select Committee and what I think is a very important bill, a simple bill, makes sense, but for me, Mr Speaker, it puts our victims at the centre. And so, without further ado, I'd like to commend and support this bill through the House. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Jan Logie.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. The Greens